Okay, so let's look at letter B with each other. Okay, so for this given sequence, we want to do the same thing. We want to describe the pattern, write the next term, and write a rule. Alright, so let's start off with step 1. Step 1 is find the pattern. So the pattern is from -2 to 2. How did that work? Multiply by -2, that could work. 4 times -8, multiply by -2, that works. -8 times -2, multiply by -2, that works. Okay, so my pattern is going to be multiply by -2. Okay. In step 2, we want to find our next term. Well, if we're at 16 and we continue this pattern, we multiply by -2, we should get -32. So my next term, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, is my 5th term, so a sub 5 is equal to -32. So my 5th term is -32. Step 3 has us coming up with a rule for this pattern. Okay, so I'm going to create my little chart again, like I did in letter A. And we obviously know that this is going to be our n values. This is a sub n, so we want to come up with a rule. So a sub n is equal to, okay, so we know that this top line represents our term values and the bottom numbers represents the actual values in our sequence. Okay. So in this case, my first term is -2. My second term is 4. My third term is -8. My fourth term is 16. My fifth term, which we know because we found it as the next term, is -32. And we really can stop there. We don't have to go on like we did before if you don't want to. We can. That's enough information that we can look at right there. So what we want to do now is we want to come up with a rule, right? So if I plug 1 in, I need to get -2 out. If I plug 2 in, I need to get 4 out. If I plug in 3, I get -8. When I plug in 4, I get 16. When I plug in 5, I get -32. So I have to come up with a rule for this. So typically, and this is what I'm going to share with you the next time that we get together for class, but 1 and 2 have a lot of options that go into these front 2 columns right here. 1 and 2 typically go into most all numbers and give us a lot of options that we can play around with here. So when it comes to finding rules and guessing and making sure that they work, I would actually start up higher and see if I can find a rule that works for the harder ones and then work backwards to see if they apply, because there's just so many options on this side that can kind of throw us off or make us spend more time looking at these rules than we really need to. So we can start up a little bit higher if we need to. In this case, we know our pattern is multiplying each previous value by -2. Okay, so let's see if we can figure out a way from get to 4 to 16. Well, 4 to 16 we can multiply by 4. Okay, so if we multiply by 4, 5 times 4 is not -32, so we know that that's not going to work. So what can we come up with that if we plug in 4, we get 16? If we plug in 5, we can get -32. And if you notice, we're also switching between positive and negative numbers here for a sequence. So I'm going to save you guys a little bit of time, and then I'm going to summarize a couple of things for you to look through for the Now You Try It's coming up. Typically, when your pattern is multiplying, so when you're multiplying numbers in between for your pattern, that number, which in this case is you're multiplying by -2, that -2 number, obviously our pattern is not or our rule is not going to be -2 times something, but instead, if you're multiplying, that number that you are multiplying for your pattern is typically going to be the base of your exponent, and your exponent is going to be left open as n.